Welcome to the Mentionables Sunday Night Live, where we touch on theology, apologetics, current events, and more. If you'd like to get involved, make sure you're in the Facebook chat. Send us a question. Without further ado, let the show begin. So, to everyone who's watching this out there, this is our first time doing this, and why is there no video showing up on the Facebook feed? That is quite interesting.
I'm looking at video on the Facebook lead, right?
You can see the
right
video?
Now. Yeah, I can only see myself, but...
Okay, well, maybe it just won't let me see it then. Okay, well, hello everybody. My name is Neil Hess, and with me is Joel. Joel, say hi.
Hi.
So
I'm Joel.
We are doing our first Sunday Night Live edition of the Mentionables, and Joel and I just wanted to give this a go and talk about a couple of things. I'm going to be focusing mainly on current events, and Joel, what are you going to be talking about?
Well, at this point, I'm going to be responding to whatever you're talking about.
Okay, so let me make sure I get into the video here on that so I can see people's comments as we are going. Hopefully I don't hear myself 1,000 times over. Hopefully.
Stick with us, folks. We're working out the technical glitches. It'll get a lot better in future Sunday Night Lives.
Indeed.
If lives is the plural of live when speaking in the verb form.
Yeah. All right, so I'll just go ahead and get started and have faith that there actually is video playing right now. So there has been a ton of talk over the past week, and rightfully so, about the situation of the young men trapped in the caves, in some underwater cave tunnels, or cave system in Asia. And I wanted to talk about some of the theological ramifications of that to various worldviews. So what I'm going to do is share a screen of a video of what this looks like. So it's a little brief CNN video, a CNN report about this. So we will go ahead and take a listen.
Tonight, rescue teams in Thailand are working around the clock, scrambling to free a youth soccer team from the flooded cave they've been trapped in for more than a week. Just found alive yesterday. 2 Navy SEAL divers, a doctor and a nurse, are tending to the boys inside the pitch-black cave now. Rescue crews have been bringing in food and water. Authorities there are looking at all of their options, none of them easy to get these boys home. Anna Corrin is out front in Thailand. So, Anna, we're hearing that it could be months before the boys are rescued because of monsoon season. What's the latest there tonight?
For sure, Kate. They are preparing for these boys being trapped inside this cave for potentially 4 months. That's to sit out the rainy season. It's monsoon season here in Thailand. We've had a break in the weather, but they are expecting rain, heavy rains in the next couple of days. Now, they are pumping water furiously from the cave, hundreds of thousands of litres every single hour, and they are making progress, reducing those levels. But they are now looking at ways to get the boys out, perhaps using a full-face oxygen mask and being let out by those Navy SEALs. So if that happens, if they can get the boys feeling comfortable, this could happen a lot sooner than we expect. Now, as for their spirits, we understand that they are in good spirits, which is quite remarkable considering we are now entering day 11 of this saga. You mentioned those Navy SEALs. There are at least 7 to 10 Navy SEALs who have been by their side ever since they were discovered. And we also understand that there's a real camaraderie amongst these team members and that they are extremely resilient. But, Kate, as we know, they are desperate to get out and be reunited with their families.
It's remarkable they be in good spirits right now. Just remarkable. Anna, thank you so much. Tom Foreman's now out front. Tom, this is a system of caves, and it's more than 6 miles long, where the boys, where the cave, part of the cave where the boys was 1 mile in, more than a mile in. Explain what rescue workers are working against.
They're working against darkness and cold and rushing water and time. Let's take a look at the structure of this mountain and the caves inside, what they have to deal with in terms of challenges there. This is where the boys went in. They're more than a mile into the mountainside, more than a half mile down, and there is, as far as we can tell, no really complete diagram of the inside of this cave, no really good map. But if we took a hypothetical cross-section, we can explain why the boys are trapped there and why it's so hard to get them out. Let's say they came in down here. As they walked through the cave, they would have gone up and down and up and down. And then when the monsoon rains rushed in, the water started filling in those gaps. And in some cases, as you can see right there, would have made it completely impassable. How many there are like this, we don't know. Are they as big as a house, big as a football field? We don't know. We just know the professional divers are taking quite a bit of time getting from here to there, and if they want to bring the boys back out that way, as Anna just mentioned, they face real challenges. First of all, some of these boys are unable to swim. So yes, a diver could tow someone through there, but he'd still have to be used to wearing a scuba mask and being underwater for perhaps quite a period of time. Some of this water is very murky. It's hard to see. There are heavy currents. There are cramped passageways, all of which complicate that process, and ultimately all of which could lead to panic, Kate, which could be dangerous for both the rescuer and the person being rescued.
Absolutely. So what about the alternatives?
Well, Anna mentioned a few possibilities there. They could take the model from the Chilean rescue of 2010. Remember when those miners were caught underneath the ground there? They bored into the mountainside and were able to reach them and bring some of them out that way. But remember, there were 3 different boreholes, and it took more than 2 months before these happy reunion scenes finally occurred. So maybe they could go with another option, as, again, we heard a moment ago, keep supplying these kids, move them to maybe a slightly higher, safer platform there. But again, you're betting on the waters going down, and there's no sign that's going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, betting on Mother Nature here is a scary thing. Thank you, Tom. I really appreciate it. Out front now, someone who knows, Ben Reminence. He's a cave diver on the ground in Thailand, part of the team trying to figure this all out. Ben, thank you so much for taking the time. You saw firsthand what the conditions are. Help us understand what it's like.
Imagine a Colorado River underwater and with zero visibility. These were the first days when we arrived there, so we had very little hope of getting there. But as the rain stopped, it got better. The visibility cleared up, and the current got less, and we actually made good headway, and we made those, like your reporter said, 1.5 miles into the cave to the place where the kids were.
How long did it take you to get in there?
4 hours.
Wow. You know, I spoke with one diver today who said that cave diving is tough for even some of the most experienced divers. It takes training, months of training. How difficult is it going to be to teach these kids how to dive when some of them don't even know how to swim, if that's what this comes down to?
In comparison, we dive caves every day. We do a lot of cave exploration. We would not dive this cave in any conditions at all. That's why there's no fixed lines in there, because it's only being done when it's dry and safe. So diving this cave is a Mount Everest of cave diving. We have to lay heavy fixed lines for about 1.5 miles into the cave, and then that was the hardest job of all. So to connect a lifeline with the kids.
Wow. There's now a doctor and a nurse that are in the cave with the boys and their coach. Can they survive in there for 3-4 months until the floodwaters recede? I mean, that's a real option right now?
They're running out of options. The conditions were quite good. The heavy pumps were doing their job. The water was receding quite a bit. It dropped 6 foot in the last days. They were hoping it would be low enough so they could literally swim the kids out. But the water has risen. Yesterday, the water came up a bit, and they're expecting heavy rains, which would flood the entire system. You've seen the base caves on footage. If the rain starts, these would all flood, making the distance to the entrance double, which makes it impossible to get to the kids. So yes, they would have to be literally locked up for 3-4 months until the rain stops and the water resides. They would take big packs of food with them for this time.
Real quick, Ben, you said you were surprised that they were all alive and in good condition. I think everyone probably is. Do you know anything about how they spent those 9 days in pitch black before they were found?
I have a team of doctors that are consulting me. They were a bit worried about their mental state. Obviously, 10 days with no solid food, no light, probably bats flying around against them, which is not very stimulating for the mental health. But surprisingly, yes, they were. One of the British team actually serviced there first, and they were actually talking English with them, asking them what day it is and do you have food? We're a bit hungry. So yes, they're in very, very good shape. Obviously, muscle atrophy, too weak to walk, and that's what they're doing right now, supplying them with a little bit of food and slowly getting their powers back.
It's a good news and a scary news story. I mean, all wrapped into one. Thank God they're alive. They're really up against some challenges still. Ben, thank you for what you're doing. Thanks for coming on.
All right. So that is what's happening right now in Thailand. So these young men are trapped. Since this video has been posted, actually, they have rescued, I believe, 4 of these young men. And let's see here. Sorry, there we go. So they've actually rescued 4 of these young men since that time. And sorry, I'm still working with the technical stuff. And so it's interesting that the reporter ended with, thank God that they're able to find the kids and try and help them out. But what's interesting to me is, first of all, we should take a moment. If you're a believer watching this, we should all take a moment and say a prayer for the safe return of these young men and the divers and all the people helping out. And if there's a legit, donation kind of a thing to donate to, we should be proactive in doing whatever we can. But all that aside from praying and from the practical things that we can do, from a strictly materialist atheistic point of view, you can have a preference saying, oh, I'm glad or I'm happy that these kids were found, or I'm glad that people are doing these things to be taken out. But this is kind of going back to the very simple version of a moral ethic of, is what they're doing morally good? And in a purely secular, in a purely atheistic, materialistic worldview, that would be impossible to say that what they're doing is objectively good. And that, I think, is so interesting, because a Christian can say, yes, this is good. What people are doing, they are willing to sacrifice themselves. And sadly, I believe, if I remember correctly, there's already a diver who's lost his life trying to get supplies to these young men. But it is an objective good. It is a reflection of the mercy and grace of God that these things are happening. So it's really important for us to always, not to say this to be unkind or rude to atheists or materialists or anything like that, or to condemn them, because I'm certainly would think that 99% of atheists actually would agree that, yeah, this is a good thing happening here. It's just inconsistent with their own worldview. But it's important to remember that only a worldview that actually says, yes, there is a God and God does have moral absolutes, only in that framework can we actually say, yes, this is a good thing that's happening. So, Joel, do you have any thoughts on that? Any insights? Any comments?
Well, there's a lot that could be said about this situation. First thing that came to mind was, man, soccer teams cannot catch a break. But that aside, obviously, what you're saying is, a well-documented problem with atheism is that, there's no ontological grounding for human worth, right? Mm-hmm. So, what makes a human being have any more or less worth than any other object in the universe? And you can say, well, they're alive, they're self-conscious, and so forth. Yeah, but that raises the problem. How does consciousness arrive in the first place? We don't really have a mechanism for how the raw mechanisms of the universe give rise to consciousness in a human being. And even if, humans are unique in some respect, you've got you've got an overpopulated planet, according to some, and a couple of lives in a cave, in the grand scheme of things, what's that matter? Now, your humanist, which is generally, if an atheist is going to be moral in any way, shape, or form, they're going to go resort to humanism because that's kind of a basis of morality that you can sort of attach your atheism to without appealing to the transcendent. And so under humanism, we operate completely off of empathy. You know, put yourself in this place of these soccer players. You wouldn't want to be there. You'd want them to be rescued. So therefore, that's the right thing to do. And you know, they'll say human flourishing as the thing that drives morality in general. But human flourishing is a really kind of general term, and it doesn't, you know, specify which humans should flourish and how it should be. You know, it's basically this general idea. Well, as long as humanity as a race can get along okay, then we should be good. But you know, you got to do so one person at a time, I guess. Now, it's interesting that you should bring this up because this is a point that was raised on a recent episode of the podcast and radio show Unbelievable. You familiar?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Did you hear the episode where Justin Brierley was being interviewed by the atheist?
No, I did not hear that one.
Okay. So, long story short, at some point this atheist floated this idea of how we could determine what is moral and what is immoral, you know, what is human flourishing, in a fairly accurate way from an atheist perspective. And what he used was a philosophical mechanism called the veil of ignorance. This is how the veil of ignorance works. You take a situation like the one with the soccer players there. All right, so you've got these soccer players, young men in Thailand. They're trapped in a cave. What other players do you have in the scenario? Well, you've got the divers that are going to rescue them. You have their parents and loved ones that are worried about them. You have, say, the government that's paying for the rescue attempt. So you've got a couple of players in here. Now, the veil of ignorance says that if you didn't know who you were going to be in that scenario, if you were going to be one of the soccer players, one of the divers, the government financing it, the loved ones, you know, not knowing which one you're going to be, what's the best outcome to that scenario? So you could argue that, well, I mean, it would save money and it would save some of the risk to the divers for them not to rescue them. So in the grand scheme of things, I'd be better off if I were a diver. I'd be better off if I were the government paying for the money. And, you know, I mean, the parents are going to get over it eventually, right? But then again, you say, you know, from an emotional perspective, diving down and getting them is the thing to do with the veil of ignorance attached, because you've got these if you're one of the soccer players, this is a terrible situation to be in. You would not want to be there, so you'd want to be rescued. If you're the parents, you really want your child to be rescued. So, you know, the emotional effect of being, say, the diver risking their life, or the government having to finance this, or whoever, what other players you have in there, is pretty negligible. So, and therein you have the problem, because on the one hand, letting the divers die is probably the best use of resources, but letting the divers live is the emotionally good thing to do. So the veil of ignorance is kind of an iffy thing to do.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. It's just it comes down to those presuppositions, and that's why over the years I have shifted largely to a kind of a presuppositional stance and the way I approach things. Not that I have obviously any animus or anything else toward people who differ with me, but I have found it to be very helpful in explaining things, and just the emotional aspect of things is, you know, it's. I'm sorry, my train of thought got derailed here. I'm trying to do three things at once and still adjusting to it. So now Kyle in the chat room here brought up a very interesting point. He says, humans flourishing seems susceptible to speciesism. I could be missing something here. No, Kyle, I don't think you're missing anything. I think you're dead on. If this was a baboon baboon family stuck down there, and you had a baboon, pardon me, if you had a baboon scuba team trying to swim in and get them and say, well, that is, the moral good to do. Absolutely. I think you could make a point there that at that point it becomes, I'm just rooting for my species. I'm just rooting for my team. And that is what determines the moral goodness or badness of something. So Kyle, I think you're right on there.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the speciesism thing goes, you could make sort of a utilitarian argument that human life is innately more valuable because we have self-consciousness, because we have such potential to build things and to care for the planets. And, the human flourishing is the flourishing of the planet because we're the caretakers of the planet. When we mess up, the planet goes down. When we thrive, the planet goes up. So, human flourishing in the grand scheme of things. But, again, this from an atheist perspective, where does the value come from? This is a race to the end with no prize at the finish line, right? Everybody's going to die sometime. And as opposed to a more metaphysical mindset where the life in the material universe is not the only thing that is, and that values come to the physical universe from something outside the physical universe. It's a lot easier way to operate because under atheism, under materialism, you really have to find ways to justify any kind of moral schema. We all have it. We all have a moral schema. We just don't have a grounding for it if we don't include the metaphysical.
Absolutely. So if you're watching this now or after the fact and you want to respond to that, make sure that you leave a comment and let us know. Joel, and you said you didn't really have anything on the docket for today. Is that correct?
Well, we had talked before we started doing these episodes. We're new at this, but we'll come up with a better schema of things in the future. We had talked about doing a segment called My New Thing, where each of us trots out something we're really into recently. So I could do that. Could you?
Yeah, I could. Why don't you start, though?
All right, fair enough. Well, the thing that I really recently got into was condensing and posting blogs on my personal theology. One of the biggest problems I had in doing this was finding a name for it to begin with. So I named it because it's a little complex, but I'll hit the high points. The basis of the philosophy or the theology is that the world we have is the necessary world, is the only possible world if one considers God's nature. So, say, for instance, in Molinism, you hear this thing about possible worlds. This would state that all other worlds would be impossible because God is who he is. And so the fundamental tenets are twofold. First of all, that the universe exists and God created the universe and everything within the universe is what it is because it is a actualization of God's nature. So, God has all these attributes we give him. He's all wise and he's all loving and he's just and he's forgiving. You could go down the line. But for him to have those attributes, he must exercise those attributes. Say God didn't create. Say he sat around in a state of eternity and didn't do anything. So you've got a timeless, spaceless, inactive being, a static God. There's not a whole lot of difference between that and no God at all. The fact that God acts, that he creates, he creates because he is creator. He loves because he is love. He judges because he is justice. All of these things are played out across the universe and across human history. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that this assumes that God is atemporal, meaning that he's not bound to time. So the best way to view this is that God is instant. He is present simultaneously in every moment of history. So the same God that created the world is simultaneously sending a flood. He's simultaneously coming to the earth as Christ. He's simultaneously judging the world and making a new heaven and earth. All of those things are happening simultaneously in God's consciousness because he's eternal. He's present instantly in every aspect of time. So using those two ideas, you can get a lot of meat out of the scripture and out of theology. And I have had these ideas for quite a while. Actually, my dad passed them on to me. But I've never put them down in paper, and now I'm doing that on my blog, and I'm very excited about that. That's my new thing. What's your new thing, Neil?
My new thing is an appreciation of the relationship, and I'm just, for everyone else out there, I had my first child 6 months ago, and I took kind of a hiatus from the Mentionables for quite a while I was adjusting, becoming a new father. And what I realize is that having a child for me, on a deeper level than I'd ever experienced before, develops empathy, compassion, love, and you start to really grasp, I think, better the preciousness, the appreciation for your child, like I think God does for his children. Certainly we're not perfect to the degree that he is, obviously, but I was like, for example, I was looking at my son and thinking to myself, how could anyone ever go through with an abortion? I look at my son and I am just so head over heels in love with him. And I was head over heels in love with him before he was even born, but and this is one issue I harp on, just because abortion is straight up evil, and I will not mince words about that. And so that has been one for me. I just appreciate him and love him so much. It's really, I think it's really cultivated more empathy and simultaneously tried my patience and given me more patience at the same time. So that's my new thing, is having a kid and just understanding those things better. So, all right, Joel, unless you have any objections. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, just I've had this thought about abortion recently, that it's strange to me that, if you were to stand in a crowd and say you're pro-life, you're definitely going to get the response, well, you must be a Christian then. And I'm wondering, why are those two things synonymous? That for a while that's that hasn't clicked with me, because there are a lot of other reasons to believe that killing your unborn child is wrong, and that the unborn child is in fact a viable human being, and so that there's a lot of arguments you can make outside of the Christian worldview. Mm-hmm. But for some reason the two are inextricably linked to one another. And I mean, I suppose there's a lot could be said about that, but Adam Coleman, one of the Mentionables, was talking the other day about this idea of the imago Dei, the image of Christ, or I'm sorry, the image of God, imago Dei, on each human being, which gives the person that worth, that transcendent worth above and just the material universe, which kind of circles back around to what we were talking about originally with the soccer team. Life is valuable to the Christian because it is invaluable to God. And so, I mean, that could be a long way toward explaining it. Now, on an uncomfortable side note, I think the other idea is this whole deal that, for the Christian, the idea behind sex is sort of this intimacy within the context of marriage. But increasingly in society at a large, it's this idea of, personal fulfillment is linked up with sex. Mm-hmm. So sex is something that fulfills you as a person, it makes you a person, and it's a right that all human beings have. And therefore, the pro-choice movement is, the choice is whether or not to have the child. The choice is not whether or not to have the act that creates the child in the first place. that's not under question here. That's a must. Whether or not you have the kid that results from it, that's optional. And this really was driven with this new incel movement. Have you seen those?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so the incel movement came to light when some kid, I can't remember the exact story. He did something kind of violent. He might have driven his car into his high school, or taken a gun someplace and shot things up. But he announced that this is the incel revolution, and incel stands for involuntary celibate, meaning that it's a guy that just can't get it. He
Yes.
wants some, he can't get some, or he's involuntarily celibate.
Okay.
And now that happened, the whole thing, you go on the internet, you look at it, there's groups, there's organizations all around this incel thing, and this, if nothing else, this really highlights this idea that sex is a right. It's a human right that every individual must receive, and if they don't, their human rights are being violated by society at large. You can't allow this.
And what do they base rights in, or on? What's their foundation for rights?
Yeah, the background, empathy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Joel, I got to wrap this up.
Definitely.
It's saying up here on my thing, I got 2 minutes left. Something's up with Zoom Room, so I'm going to have to check it out. So we're going to have to wrap it up for today, but we will be back next week. Perhaps I'm supposed to be out of town for my cousin's wedding, but if I'm back in time, maybe we can. That would be cool. So to all you watching out there, thank you for watching. If you have any comments, please leave them below in the comments section, and don't forget to visit thementionables.org, and you can get in touch with us via social media and through all the other channels. So thank you very much, and we hope you enjoyed the Mentionables Sunday Night Live. Take care. Thank you for joining us on the Mentionables Sunday Night Live. For more information, check out thementionables.org, and there you can connect with us via Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and our other social media platforms. Until next time, take care.